You're on Pure 24/7 radio with me, Dan, and thank you for choosing to be there. It is time for our brunch blether, and I am very pleased to introduce the gentleman who will tell us all about this thing called Camerados. What's this all about? Let's find out when we say hi to Maff Potts. Hiya, Maff.
Hi Dan, how you doing?
I am doing well. How's yourself?
Well, I'm very excited to see that you are in fact wearing your Camarados badge as
I
we speak.
I am indeed. And as a reminder, you'll be listening to this on the radio, but you can go to our YouTube channel later on and we shall raise a Camarados mug to one another. And you can see all the very subtle branding for the thing that's Camarados. So we've got this big C, we've got yellow everywhere. What's it all about, Math? What's this Camarados thing?
Oh yeah, it was something that I started in my bedroom 10 years ago, and I'm very happy to say it's been picked up by lots of people far clever than I who live in countries all over the world, and they're now part of it too. And it's a social movement, and it's just trying to get people to look out for each other and create places and spaces where there's no agenda. We're just humans, and we're rubbing along together and getting each other through tough times. It sort of came from the fact that I spent 20 years working in services, very traditional institutional services for people with pretty tough lives. And I saw that housing was useful, but didn't turn their life around. Money was useful, but didn't turn their life around. But when they had other people in their life, then and people looking out for them and them looking out for others, and it gave them a huge sense of purpose. It gave them connection. And those things, those two things, that's what turned it around. And so I started this little movement, and we help people in communities start things called public living rooms. A public living room is just a place you can go with no agenda, just company, because connection is enough. And people are doing it in hospitals, libraries, bandstands, parks, community centres, canal boats, Dan, all over. And it's for absolutely anybody and anyone to come in and look out for each other. It's a mutual space.
Yeah,
And
it's a
yeah,
wonderful. Sorry, yeah, it's a wonderful thing, and it's been great to get to know it. You kind of live by six principles, don't you? So I'm going to put you on the spot as the founder of Camarados to tell us what these six principles are, Math.
I feel like I should have the countdown clock going.
We can put that on afterwards.
I bet you would as well. Yeah, well, I guess the thing that makes the place a little bit more human, a little bit more mutual, and stops people kind of doing what unfortunately people do tend to do when we organize, which is slightly boss each other around. We create these principles so that there's no fixing. That's number one. There's no solution, no outcomes in these spaces. There's just kick off your shoes and talk about biscuits. No fixing. It's okay to be a bit rubbish. That's related to that one. That's a very popular principle. It's all right to be a bit rubbish sometimes. Everyone is a big success, aren't they, on social media? But in a public living room, you don't have to be that. Mixed with people who are not like you seems so obvious, yet so few of us actually do it. And that's related to another principle. It's okay to disagree respectfully. None of us sit down with people we disagree with enough. So sitting in disagreement. And then the last two are what I call the counterintuitive principle, which, because it sounds funny, but when you see somebody struggling, instead of helping them, ask them to help you. And that gives them a huge sense of purpose, makes them feel trusted, belong. So that's the mutuality principle, I guess. And then the final one is one we feel very serious about, which is to be silly is to be human. Have fun. And that's where a lot of being human lies. And we tend to put these barriers up in particularly in corporate life with status and titles and jargon. So we in Camarados, we like to be silly. And so if you're a Camarado and you wear the C, you tend to live by these principles, and it tends to make people feel a little bit more human and welcome.
Yeah, it's a fantastic thing. And it's been, I mean, listeners, Meth and I go way back, but this Camarados thing actually I came aware of it during that lockdown thing. And so having built a movement that was all about people coming together with one another and gathering in public living rooms, suddenly everyone was pushed back into their rooms again, couldn't connect. And you brilliantly, if I do say so, we could edit that bit out, but brilliantly came up with this thing that, everyone was talking about the cost of living crisis, but you kind of highlighted this cost of connection crisis as part of this, didn't you?
Yeah, I got really scared and quite panicky after the pandemic because having had a few years of enforced isolation, we then had a cost of living crisis where we didn't have enough money in our pocket to go out and meet people when we could go out. So now we're allowed out, but we can't afford to. So people aren't socializing, they're not meeting. And some of your listeners will be thinking, well, that's not the biggest hardship in the world, is it? Well, actually, it is, because connection is what gets you through a tough time. And isolation is, I'm afraid, the common thread. And you know this, Dan, because you and I have both worked with people right at the margins of society, as people say. And the common thread with all of these people, whether it's homelessness, domestic violence, addiction, whatever, the common thread is isolation and loneliness. And actually, that's what kills people. And it's not fashionable to say it, because people like to say it's crack and heroin, and those things don't help. But it's the isolation, and actually it's connection that gets people out of that spiral. It really is. I profoundly believe that, and I believe that after 20 years of running very full-on services. So so the pandemic followed by a cost of living crisis, I really panicked, and I thought, my gosh, we're going to make isolation endemic. And I mean, that's why I do this other thing, which is I go out onto the street with a load of sofas and armchairs and illegally put it on the pavement without permission, and just talk to whoever sits down next to me. And in fact, you have been there with me, Dan.
We have had the pleasure, and yes, and whilst at Pure, we don't have anything that's illegal. This is kind of fun, having some fun, basically, isn't it? And it's turning up with a van load of furniture, putting it on a street corner, and just sitting there and seeing what happens. And it's the outcomes are powerful, and you would never really get those in any formal setting, would you? With some of the stories that people open up just by sitting on a sofa on a street corner.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because just to allay any fears of your listeners, if the police ever do come along, they have never, not once, moved me on. I've had private security guards get a bit upset, and council employees, but the police love it,
Yeah.
and they sit down with us and join in, because it's about community, and a lot of people got into the police force to help their community. So no, it's the most profound thing I've ever done professionally. It's unfiltered meeting of strangers, and actually it was because of that I wrote a book about the stories that I heard there, because I would talk to people in the pub or over dinner or whatever and tell them some of the stories, and people said, Maff, you've got to write these down.
Yeah.
And so that's what led to the book.
Yeah, excellent. And for those that are watching this on the YouTube, we'll see the very subtle banner behind you, being the cover of the book, and we'll come to that in just a second. Actually, on that banner at the top, we have the mug, and here at Pure, we are equal opportunities. We welcome tea and coffee drinkers alike. And in fact, listeners, one of our jingles, you won't have heard this, Maff, but it says Pure Radio is everyone's cup of tea, even if yours is a coffee. Which at Christmas morphed into a mulled wine as well. So this is it. But we also we brought this up on Pure Brunch the other week as well about biscuits. Now, bizarrely, biscuits are actually probably one of your most powerful resources within Camerados, aren't they? And they actually lead to the most amazing discussions as well.
Oh, we have weaponized biscuits. Manufacture. Yeah, no, I believe it's a subject on which all of your listeners would get quite animated.
Yep.
So if someone's listening now while they're driving along, and I was to say something like a custard cream is, of course, the best biscuit, there'll be quite a few people shouting at the radio right now, and getting excited, particularly the bourbon eaters among you, which seems to be a bit of rivalry. I don't know why bourbons and custard creams, they're rivalry. We did in fact do a poll with YouGov, a very reputable polling company, and we did a poll about social isolation. But they said to us, Maff, you've paid for 5 questions, but you've only asked 4. What do you want your 5th one to be? So naturally, we said, could you also ask people while you're asking them about social isolation, ask them what their favorite biscuit is. So we ended up with an unofficial national poll from thousands of people all across the UK. And what do you think came first?
It's going to be the custard cream, I'm guessing, is it?
No, it came third.
Really? Was it the
And it came
hobnob? The hobnob, maybe?
it came joint third with the bourbon, which was perfect,
Wow.
really.
Yeah.
Well done. Yes, the chocolate hobnob came number one.
Specifically the chocolate hobnob, not just a normal hobnob. Had to have the chocolate on it, did it?
Correct.
Right, okay.
But what I would say, and I think it is important because these things are important now. This is vital stuff we're discussing. That actually the milk chocolate digestive was number one in Scotland and the north of England by a long way. But the sheer number of people in the southeast of England swayed it in favour of the hobnob. Yes, we segmented it regionally.
Wow.
There you go.
This is how serious we take this. I mean, I would have to, and I bet this didn't. It may have come in some ways in the top 10, but the stem ginger cookie. I mean,
Oh.
I mean that.
You hipster. I'm surprised you don't have your craft ale and your beanie on right now there, Dan.
Oh no, I took those off for the recording, but we have. I mean, you've documented it, and we'll come to, I'm sure, with the book, that actually a conversation about biscuits and just providing a space where there is. Well, it was. I mean, you like the letter C, don't you? So we got Camerados, and then it was coffee, custard creams, and Connect Four. And these were the things that you said, I think you wrote in some document a little while ago, that these should be in everyone's mental health strategy. It's having a budget for coffee, custard creams, and Connect Four. And those three things just seem to be some recipe for just unlocking whatever is locking people's minds.
And it's funny because I was with Housing Justice yesterday, who are a faith-based homelessness organization, and I was with all of their staff, and I was saying to them that, people don't put those things next to some of the toughest problems in society. And yet, time and time again in Camarados, we see that it's the thing that helps. When someone has a complete mental breakdown, how many of them do you think say, you know, what I need is an intervention from a service, preferably with a needs and risk assessment? Yeah, not many people say that. No. But if someone says, do you want a cup of tea and a custard cream and a game of Connect Four, and there was a fella who walked into a public living room many years ago, and I tell the story in the book, and I tell the story a lot every week. And he just said to me, we were playing Connect Four for about an hour, having a cup of tea, not really talking, just sitting there with each other. And he said, Maff, he said, I've been walking up and down this street looking for somewhere to end my life this morning. And he said, I'd forgotten how much I enjoy Connect Four. And he said, I don't think I'll do it today. And the casual way was obviously shocking, and I was very worried. But something as simple as that just nudged him in the direction of sticking around. Because what he was really saying, of course, was I'd forgotten that actually, a bit of humanity and people and connection and company and a bit of a laugh. You know what? Maybe life's not so bad. And that is profound, and yet it's something as banal as a game of Connect Four and a custard cream and a coffee. So yeah, I agree.
Which is amazing, and certainly in these days when budgets are smaller to non-existent, people don't need to get some massive strategist in. They just need to get even the non-official version of Connect Four that you can probably pick up for a $5 somewhere, and a packet of biscuits and a few bits of tea and coffee. And just in the last few days, you put out some new things for the Camarados to share, which like there's one that says, brilliant idea, let's have a brew or let's have a coffee together. And the power of just sitting and having that tea and coffee, and we would say putting Pure Radio in the background, of course. But just that simple thing of let's have it. It's always the joke, isn't it? If there was something bad on TV soap operas, it's like, let's put the kettle on. And it's kind of joked away, but actually it's such a powerful resource to do that together, and not even do it for someone and say, well, look, there's the kettle, go and grab a brew, grab a seat and join in.
Absolutely. That's why the expression "put the kettle on" is great. It's like, could you do something for me? I love it. Yeah,
it's brilliant. So This book, this has been a bit of literally a labor of love, because it's come out of love, but it's very much been a labor to get this to the press. This book was launched in person just last week, but there is also an online launch of it in 2 days' time, on Thursday of this week. A book which I believe, from the banner behind you, is called Friends and Purpose. Stories from sofas on the streets. I mean, it kind of says what it is, but Maff, tell us what this book is all about. Why you wanted to make this into a book now?
Well, people have been encouraging me to write a book for years and years, and I found the first draft the other day, and it was 2018. So I've been doing it for 6 years, but I kept giving up, Dan, because it's just the most narcissistic enterprise ever. Sitting in a room, writing, 200 pages of a book where it's only your voice is speaking. So I just felt like this guy, like pointing my finger at people and saying, and another thing for 200 pages. And so I just used to get sick of the sound of my own voice, and I'd put the book in the bottom drawer and forget it. And then I'd pick it out again. And so I couldn't push through that really until I started putting the sofas on the streets. And then that was permission, because suddenly I could tell these people stories. I could give them a voice. I could give them a platform. And so that's what I do. Every other chapter in the book is a place. There's Port Talbot, for instance. I'm just wondering, because there is in fact a picture of you in here.
Oh, there better not be.
There is, because there is, mate. I didn't even ask you permission. How about that?
You didn't. We'll talk about royalties later, but yeah.
But somewhere here there is a chapter in the lovely Scottish town of Alloa, and you are sat on the sofa. And so every other chapter is a place, and then every other chapter, the alternate chapters, are some ideas that I have come across in 30 years of working with people with tough lives that are perhaps a bit confounding. And by having the people's voices from the streets in those town chapters, I felt it was okay for me to talk in the other ones, and that finally unlocked the book for me, and I got the thing done. And I mean, there's a funny story about the final furlong, which I can tell you, but basically I got the thing done, and now it's in my hand, and it's a very strange feeling.
And it's great to be there, and listen, an honor to be even mentioned anywhere near that book. But yeah, that Alloa one is a story I often tell as well. How a guy, well, there was two stories really. One involved two sort of meetings of world. You mentioned earlier about how the police love this, and you remember there was a community police officer who came along, and at the same time, this kind of Billy Connolly type guy in double denim with his carry out in his bag just stood there, arms stretched, going, "This is brilliant," and sat down and kind of did that bit of bounce around on the sofa, like this is brilliant, and then disappeared off to another drinking establishment. And that police officer, with the words that stuck with us, who kind of wrote the whole thing of Camerados in one sentence, would said, for 5 minutes he felt normal. And how is sitting on a street corner on a sofa in Alloa normal? But actually, this guy just felt, with no agenda, no one through any point said, actually, you shouldn't really be drinking that much, sir, or whatever else is going on. They just said, have a seat, mate. How's it going?
That's it.
Powerful, wasn't it?
I tell exactly that story. You'll be pleased to hear.
Oh, brilliant. It's like I've read the book, which I haven't had a copy of the book yet. I'm going to need to get a copy of that.
Well, it only just arrived in my hands, so it's nothing personal. The box just arrived yesterday morning. But
brilliant.
There's you. For YouTube watchers, I'm now showing a picture of Dan sat on a sofa.
Oh, scary. Yeah.
And that is the chapter on Alloa, and I tell the story that Dan has just told. I'm also showing you a colour photograph, which is hilarious because they're supposed to be black and white, but the printer made a mistake and gave me a colour copy and charged me for the black and white. Come on!
Oh, brilliant. There's a result.
So there you go. But that story is told in the Alloa one, and there's another story in the Alloa one. I don't know if you remember a fella who came with two very large Afghan hounds.
Yeah.
I tell that story too, and I must say I do find it hard to read some of these stories without crying. And even though I wrote them and I was there, I just remember that some of these people and their lives really touched me. What's going on, and that guy with the dogs had lost his wife, and the dogs pull him out of bed every morning because otherwise he wouldn't get up.
Yeah.
And I find it really hard to read. So I'm not going to be reading that out on the online launch in 2 days because I won't get through it. But if any of your listeners want to come along, find Camerados on social media, and there will be an invitation to come to the online launch and find out more.
Yeah, it's well worth it. Yeah, it is. It is kind of a tear alert, isn't it? And there's an emotional. There will be an emotional read with this because, having lived some of these stories and seen some of these, I mean, no way would anyone have had that outlet to share some of the things they've shared just by walking
Yeah.
down the street, and suddenly there's a sofa there, and it's the most profound thing. And in fact, going back, tell us the story of the public living room that was really, really successful. And then the health board tried to make it into something formal by changing the wording on the blackboards.
Oh yeah. That was in a NHS hospital, and we have these chalk A-frames outside the public living room in the hospital, and it just said, "Put your feet up, have a brew, be a camarado." Nobody knows what this word camarado means, so people would just wander in, and we had a little infrared counter on the door because the NHS have to count everything. And we don't like counting things, so we had to disguise our counter. And we found out that 1,000 people were coming in every week, which is amazing.
Yeah.
However, one week, the NHS Trust, the hospital, they rubbed out the chalk and they wrote, "It's time to talk, hashtag Mental Health Awareness Week." And when we got the counter back, instead of 1,000 coming through the door that week, it went down to 40. And I think that just tells you a lot of things. It tells you about the power of language. It tells you that people don't necessarily want to self-identify as having mental health in their life, but also people probably, I think my gut is the reason they didn't come in is they thought someone would try and fix them or talk to them about problems or whatever. It didn't feel welcoming. It was a barrier. And I grew up in Carlisle on the border of Scotland. Being, having the word mental anywhere near you was not positive. So, it's really, it's interesting language. And the thing about the street, of course, is there's no filter. So people, when I put the sofas on the pavement, I just buy a newspaper and sit down and start reading it. People come along and say, "What's this?" And I say, "Oh, I don't know." And then they just think I'm like them, and they don't treat me like a staff member or volunteer. And that's really important. If you're a staff member and volunteer, you have a tough time breaking down that barrier. It's a hard job for you to meet people on the level because they put you on a pedestal. So I don't want that. So and it works to treat, and you'd be amazed how people open up. I mean you know this, Dan, of course, but your listeners might be surprised that setting out to achieve nothing in a space where you can just sit and talk about biscuits, you end up having the most extraordinary stories told to you, and it's a huge privilege for me.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and of course, we don't try and fix people, and that's very much a recipe for life. Is not telling people how they should find the answers, just helping them to discover the answers for themselves. I do a bit of that through some development coaching as well. Which is always hilarious for me, that always wants to fix people and to help people to get the answers. Actually, no, we're not trying to fix people. But you will point people where necessary. But this is about, obviously there's a time and a place to seek medical help, but actually the intervention is give them a cuppa, or give them the place to go and make that cuppa, give them the biscuit, and that can actually help to process things. So even if they do choose to go for that formal medical help at some point, actually they've got some of the answers a little bit clearer in their head before they've gone in, which could then help the medical professionals.
Yes, and actually, I spoke to a lot of GPs a couple of weeks ago at the Royal College of General Practitioners, and it was a conference about working with people with addictions. And everyone was talking about how short the consultation is with the doctor, and how in the last minute of a 10-minute chat with the doctor, people say, "Actually, doctor, it's not my back, it's not my knee, it's the fact that my life isn't great, and I'm lonely, and I'm sad." And the doctor has 1 minute left. So I would love them to be able to say, "Well, why don't you wander down to the public living room, put your feet up, and you'll have some company at least." And I think that's a powerful thing, that public living rooms can help services and release pressure on services. by giving people what most people want underlying their primary or seemingly primary need. I just wanted to, this is interesting. This is my very first interview after bringing the book out, and I realize now why I get irritated by people plugging their books, because I'm doing it. But there was a chapter called When Humans Organize.
Mm.
And it's a really interesting thing that we just can't help ourselves but organize people.
Mm.
When and actually just provide the tea and coffee and the sofas and see what happens, can lead to people feeling much more comfortable to do things. But we can't help but build systems around people, and find a more efficient way to do things. Now, the word efficient it's just a given that it's positive. It's not my experience that a pursuit of efficiency is positive, because a pursuit of efficiency often eliminates the human.
Mm.
And I just think it's a really interesting thing, isn't it? And you know, I find that creating spaces and communities where I'm not telling you how to live your life, it is, and for some of your listeners, I know you have a lot of listeners who are Christian, I think that's belief in action, you see.
Yeah.
It's my actions are telling you I'm Christian. I'm not having to use words that are telling you how to live your life. Yeah. Because as soon as I start doing that, you back off at 1,000 miles an hour and I never see you again. Whereas if I'm actually behaving like a Christian, you know, and Camerados is not a Christian movement, but a lot of the values are the same, which is I'm just going to have positive regard for you, and I'm going to show you that in my actions rather than tell you that. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. And I have often, if I'm trying to explain Camerados, it's possibly one of the most Christian, non-Christian movements that I know, and just the way it is, and not pushing stuff down people. And that's very much how we are here at Pure, is just actually showing that we can be normal, we can have fun, we can enjoy all sorts of things, but actually we just want to look out for one another. And as one of your many t-shirts says, be more human.
Yeah. It's if I wasn't pushing my book down, I'd be wearing it now, wouldn't I? I pretty much always have my merch on, but no, yeah, be more human. I mean, that's I guess something that is open to, I guess, interpretation. But I think everyone knows exactly what it means.
Yeah.
And you know when you're in the presence of the inhuman, don't you?
Yeah.
And in human service, and you know, both you and I, Dan, have worked for faith-based organizations, and we've seen the good and the bad of that. And the good is that people tend to lean into the human side of themselves and aren't afraid of talking about this thing called love. Really interesting being with this charity yesterday who said they were really struggling with that. They wanted to talk about it, but the commissioners and the councils and people they were working with got very uncomfortable talking about love. And, you know, if you're working in a human business, how can you work in that business and not talk about love? I mean, the Beatles said it is all you need. And yet somehow we spectacularly missed that point. I worked in the most institutional. I worked for the British government. I worked for the biggest charities. I was chief executive charities, housing associations. I've done all the grown-up stuff where you wear a suit and you go to meetings and you sound very important and all of that. And you know, but in all of those jobs, actually the end user was a human being in crisis. Yeah. And yet we didn't talk about love. I think we were missing something, don't you?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And I know having sat in a school assembly that you did once as well. I mean, this is obviously where the title of the book has come from, is that actually what you need is just people around you and that purpose. And that's it. And, you know, you can go and write your multi-page business plans and support plans and all this kind of stuff, but just give me a place where there's people and give me a purpose in my life. And I suppose that's where the principle of asking someone to help you is actually that it takes their mind off for just a moment of whatever issue there was and gives them a focus as, oh, actually, someone wants me to do something. I've got a value. And the power in that is absolutely huge, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And you know what? A really good long-term friend of mine who's a chef, he hosted the launch I had last week in person. And he's called Simon Boyle, and he runs a foundation that helps homeless people kind of get their life back. And he does it through cooking, but he doesn't make them all chefs, but they get their life back in the process. It's called Beyond Food. It's wonderful, Beyond Food Foundation. And he got the name of my book wrong, and when discussing the launch. But the problem is, he came up with a much better title, and I thought, oh my goodness, I spent 6 years writing this. I've had it printed. I've paid for the printing. I've had it delivered. And why didn't I call it People and Purpose? I should have called it People and Purpose, but I've called it Friends and Purpose. The alliteration, and also, as I say in one of the chapters, we're not actually in the Camerados movement even seeking for a friend. We're not. We're looking for something called a camarado, which is halfway between a friend and a stranger. Someone who you don't have to be friends with, but just who looks out for you. So I should have called it People and Purpose.
Well, if anything, Maff, you've kind of lived out one of the principles behind Camerados, of which the radio edit version is that it's okay to be a bit rubbish.
Yeah, I've lived that right to the end.
And embracing that rubbishness, and listeners will know that we make a complete hash of this stuff sometimes, but we have fun while we're doing it, and it's okay to be rubbish, and we're quite happy being rubbish. And
Totally.
I haven't got this far in my life without being rubbish a few times.
No, exactly. I actually, somewhere in this book, I'm doing it again, Dan.
You turned into an author, Maff.
I'm reading from my own book, how unbelievably self-regarding and egotist. But I say, I'm going to read from my book, Dan. I say here that we're a movement we're a worldwide movement that isn't hitting the headlines and doesn't particularly want to. It just fumbles along with the grain of people's lives. They do things when it feels right, not out of guilt or compulsion, and they figure stuff out person by person, neighborhood by neighborhood. And that fumbling along is how I intend to remain, because and getting it wrong, like the title of my book, is how I'm going to be. And I'm not going to get so hung up about it. Yeah. I've been through a huge amount of stress the last few weeks, and I'm just coming to the point where I'm going, meanwhile, in Gaza, you know what I mean? It's like, come on, first world problems. I'm bringing a book out. I'm running a charity, but really, come on. So I've had to have a word with myself to put the kettle on, which I have done.
Absolutely, yes. And your wonderful Camarado tea cozy. I have one of those tea cozies somewhere, which I thought was a hat. And there's a scary picture of me with that on my head. But anyway, we won't go there. That's why I do radio, Maff. So Friends and Purpose, People, whatever the book's called, is a book by Maff Potts with stories from the streets. And where can people get their hands on a copy of that, Maff?
Well, yes. Last Tuesday it went live on Amazon. So if you go to Amazon and type it in, hopefully it will pop up and you can order a copy there and get one posted to your door. And we did that because it's the best way to get it global, because Camerados we've got 270 public living rooms in 6 countries now, and we're really taking off in America. And for them to get a copy, we've got to sell it through Amazon so they can get it there.
Yeah, and of course, while you're doing that, you can then go and look for Andy B's book as well about the story of Pure Radio, which you can also get, the founding of a global radio station, also on Amazon. And you can buy the 2, and it might help with a postage discount as well. There we go.
Is that called upselling, Dan?
I believe it might be, Maff. Yes, but I think it's absolutely brilliant to do that. And of course, where can people find out more about Camerados?
Yeah, well, you can go to our website, which is camerados.org, ORG, and you can find out about us there. But also, if you are on social media, we're on Insta, Facebook, and Blue Sky and X. Doing a little bit more on Blue Sky than X these days, for a variety of reasons.
Yep. I've just moved over to Blue Sky myself, and never did like the 24th letter of the alphabet, so we won't give it any more publicity than it needs. So that's good. And it's Association of Camerados, isn't it, on socials?
Yeah, Association of Camerados, and it's an odd word, so you should be able to find us. It's camera and then DOS.
Yeah.
And it comes from a poem, actually, by Walt Whitman, the great American poet, who is I'm a fan of his. And yeah, he wrote a poem called Song for the Open Road. And on the open road of life, more important than money, more important than food, is to have a camarado alongside you for company. So there you go.
Beautiful. Well, it's wonderful having you as a camarado, Maff, and thanks so much for coming on to Pure Bunch today. So, Friends and Purpose by Maff Potts, you can go and get that on Amazon. And if you want to hear him read more, very, very egotistically from his book, this Thursday evening, that's the 13th of whatever month, February, that's the one, that's where we are, 13th of February. Go and look for Camarados on socials. You'll find a link because you do need to book in for that so that the people know who's coming. And you can go and hear more from that, but go and get that and find out more. And just look, if there's not a public living room in your area and you think that this might be something that you want to do as an organization, then get in touch through the Camaradas website, and the lovely Yvonne, I'm sure, will get in touch and chat to you about how you could do that. And it's as simple as just having some space and some biscuits.
Yeah, and you don't have to be an organization. You can just be a member of the public who just, is concerned about your neighborhood and wants to put a few chairs out on a Saturday morning. So get in touch. Dan, you're a fantastically inspiring fella. You do so much good in the world, and I love this radio show of yours. I think it's great, and keep doing it, mate. And thank you so much for inviting me on.
Yeah, you're very kind. Thanks so much for your time today, Matt. Take care.
Take care, my friend. Bye-bye.